Hello and welcome to your next episode of the free weekly Brave Journey birth preparation videos, where I pick a topic related to birth or postpartum and I talk about it. Today I'm talking about postpartum infant feeding, and in particular how to notice early hunger cues in your infant, in your newborn infant, in that immediate postpartum time. The reason this is important is that if you wait until a late hunger cue, which is, spoiler alert, it's crying, it's often hard to latch a crying baby because they're too upset and they often need help soothing before they can get a good latch. So we want to look for early hunger cues, which is what we're going to talk about next. I'm Carolee, I'm a birth doula and a childbirth educator, and let's get started. First off, a recap or a reminder. I've been saying this in every video where we talk about postpartum, but really this just goes for parenthood generally. Have a lot of compassion for yourself and have a lot of compassion for your infant, because each of you are going through a major learning curve, particularly in this immediate postpartum. One of you is learning how to eat for the first time ever, while also learning how to breathe and learning how to be a human in this world. The other one of you is you, the parent, are learning how to feed an infant, maybe for the first time, or even if you fed other infants, you're learning how to feed this exact infant. And every infant is different. Different infants like different holds, they like to eat in different positions. So it really just depends, and you're learning this infant as well. So have some compassion for yourself and for your infant. Now, like I said, it's really important to recognize early signs of hunger in your infant, because a late sign of hunger, a late hunger cue, is crying. Once your newborn infant is crying, they are often too upset to latch. So they often need help soothing, regulating their little nervous system. They can't really regulate it on their own yet. They need help soothing so that then they can focus on the hard work of latching. Nursing and latching is really hard for your infant. It's their number one job. It's exhausting and it's a big challenge. Just think of where your infant is at developmentally. So you want to look for early hunger cues to ensure that you're feeding your infant as soon as they're hungry. And again, this goes back to when we talked about establishing your milk supply. In these early weeks, postpartum, right after your baby is born, you want to be emptying your breasts of milk completely, removing all the milk at least every 1 to 3 hours. And that's whether it's through your infant's latch or a pump or hand expression. So in doing so, you're also watching your infant for their hunger cues. In the very first days and weeks, but usually, especially the first week, there's not a steady rhythm to when they're hungry, and that's okay, that's normal. Your infant is going through huge amounts of change and development these first weeks. So your infant may be hungry every 1 hour for a few hours, every 20 minutes for a few hours, and then maybe they'll have a stretch of 3 hours a couple times in a row. And you really just roll with that, feed your infant when they're hungry, and really just emptying your breast, and just make sure it's been at the most every 3 hours. Now, after the first week or two, you'll fall into a rhythm with your infant where your infant will expect to be fed every 2 to 3 hours, and that'll become a more normal rhythm for you two to find your rhythm together. But in that first week, you're really feeding quite often, but you're watching their hunger cues. So what are early hunger cues in infants? Early hunger cues in a newborn infant look like squirming, so wiggling their little bodies around, rocking their head side to side, rooting, and this is why there's so many funny instances of infants will latch onto anything. They'll latch onto your nose, they'll latch onto your finger. It's a beautiful instinct, right? So they will latch onto anything. They'll latch onto your chin. So when an infant is rooting, that means that they're moving their mouth towards anything around them and trying to latch on it. That's called rooting. So as they're moving their head towards anything near their mouth, trying to latch onto it, that's an early sign of hunger. Another sign of hunger is clenched fists. So you look at your infant's fists, and if their fists are clenched and they're wiggling their head side to side, squirming and maybe rooting, that's an early sign of hunger. So you want to respond to these early signs of hunger. And then the last, in addition to fists, clenched fists, they'll be sucking on their fists. So this is also an early sign of hunger. So you're looking for their head is wiggling around, they're rooting on anything they can find, including your nose or your chin or your finger. If anything touches their cheek, they try to root on it. Their hands are clenched and they're maybe sucking on their fists or their hands. These are early signs of hunger in a newborn infant. So you see these signs and you immediately feed them. Once they are crying, as I mentioned, it's too late. They're so upset, and this isn't every infant, but a lot of infants, particularly newborns, need help soothing. They cannot regulate their own nervous system, and so you need to often have to soothe them before you can get them calm enough to latch. So you don't want to get to a point where your infant is crying. You want to feed at those early hunger cues. Now, a few reminders. The first reminder is that I mentioned this briefly, but the eating is exhausting and tiring for your infant. It is their primary new job. So they are learning how to do this, but it is tiring. So often once you get them latched, for newborn infants, it's not uncommon for them to fall asleep immediately. This is for two reasons. One, it is so soothing and comforting at your breast or a bottle. It is just their number one most soothing place to be. Number two, it's tiring. It takes a tremendous amount of energy. It is exhausting for them to eat. If you think about how small their bodies are and how much is going on as they're changing and adapting to being out of the womb, eating is very exhausting. So sometimes you have to gently rub their backs as they nurse, or gently massage their feet to keep them awake, just to remind them to keep eating until they've finished or drained your breasts, or perhaps they unlatch and then you pump or hand express. Second reminder or tip is that it's really difficult for an infant that has trouble latching to an engorged breast. So an engorged breast is a breast that is so full of milk that it becomes like rock hard, and it's so firm that it's really difficult for the infant to fully get their mouth around the nipple and then remove milk. So sometimes when your milk first comes in, you may experience real engorgement, and it'll go down over a few days. But you may have to hand express using your hand just a few streams of milk until your breast is a little bit softer to help your infant latch. And hand expression is a learned skill. It's weird at first. We're not used to milking ourselves, but it's really a really good, useful skill. It's also helpful if you don't have a pump ready or handy and you're separated from your infant for a period of time and you really need to get some milk out, because it can get very uncomfortable. But hand expression is a useful skill to have, and it's also especially useful in the beginning. You experience more breast engorgement in the beginning when your milk first comes in, and it's really hard for a newborn baby sometimes to latch to engorged breast. So that's just a little tip for you, along with these early signs of hunger. So that's it for this video on early hunger cues and attending to those. I will see you in the next video.